Hello again and welcome to C# tutorials. This one is on exceptions, and this one might be familiar to you or it may not be familiar to you depending on your background. Let's just start up with what I set up here. I have two text boxes and a button. One I'm going to enter a string and one I'm going to enter an index and a button. And what this is going to do is that I'm going to store a string in the specific index that I entered into this array right here. And in C#, you're able to try a block of code and catch any exceptions that may have occurred in the program. And I want to leave this finally block out for a second. I'm just going to talk about the try and catch. Now, the try and catch is a great way of testing out a piece of code and catching any exceptions that may have occurred without actually crashing your program. Now, if I have entered an index for this array that was out of bounds, normally you would get some errors down here and it wouldn't run and you would have to find it and try to correct it. This way, if I enter an index that's out of bounds, it's in my try block, and it tries out that index to see if it works, and if it doesn't, if there's some kind of error, I catch it with this catch clause right here. Now, there's some built-in exceptions in C#, and you could do it two ways. You could do it the standard way, which a lot of people might be familiar with, which is you type exception and a variable name, and you show a message of what might have happened. If you're familiar with Java, you would use like print stack trace or something like that. But here, there's some built-in messages that occur with the exceptions. In this case, if I enter an index that's out of bounds, it would give you an error in this try block, catch it with the exception class, which tests and see if there's any errors occurred, and give you a message that you're out of bounds based on that. So you could also do it another way. You could also eliminate this completely and go ahead and just type your own little message in the box saying like out of bounds right here, and it will still catch an exception of some sort, but now you don't use that EX variable of type exception right here that you use. Now you're just using your own little print statement. So let's take a look at both of those really quickly. Go ahead and run it. I'm going to type in a string called u and an index of 2, because we know this one works because the array was a size 3, which is 0, 1, and 2. When you hit the button, always run printed, which is from our finally block, which we haven't talked about yet, but we're about to. But you notice that this message for out of bounds did not print because it wasn't out of bounds. So let's go ahead and give it an error. Now normally when you give it an error, it blows up and everything goes crazy. But when you do it here, it just prints the out of bounds message that we caught the error, and then it prints the finally block, which we will talk about momentarily. So let's close that out. So you notice that it printed the out of bounds message when I hit an index that was out of the array, because the array is type of only 3 strings. So we use the other catch block, exception EX right there, and then we just go ahead and use that message. Now I would use a built-in message for this variable of the type of exception that occurred when we run it again. But before we do that, let's talk about this finally block. What this finally block does, it always runs. And I have a little message box that says always run. Now if you noticed when we ran it just now, if there was no exception that happened, the finally block still showed up. And even if there was an exception that was caught, the finally block still showed up again. That's because this finally block always runs. It always runs, no matter what. Even if an error occurred or not occurred, the finally block always runs. And this is great tool, because maybe an exception occurred and you had an error here, but you still want to print out the strings, all the strings that maybe were in the array or something. You could put that in the finally block and it'll still print it all out. So it's a great way of actually doing a piece of code that would always run no matter what happens in the catch block here, if an error occurred or not occurred. So maybe you want to do some cleanup or housekeeping in the finally block to always run no matter what the outcome is, and you could always put it here. So that's a good piece of tool with the finally block. So you have the try block that tries out some code, you have the catch block that catches any errors that may have happened, and then you have the finally block, which will always run no matter what. Okay, so this is a great way of setting up your code to do some error checking for yourself. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this again like I promised, which using the exception EX variable with a message that's built into C#. So let's go ahead and run that. And once again, we're going to type U and an index of 3, which is out of bounds. And look, index was outside the bounds of the array. See, this is the built-in message inside C#. Click OK, and always run shows up because the finally block always runs no matter what. Okay, this was a short tutorial on exceptions. I hope this was helpful. It was just short enough so you could understand what's going on here. I will see you in the next video.